The stars had never seemed so distant. From the highest balcony of Zyra's palace, the vast empire stretched before me, a city carved from obsidian and light, a world built on war and ambition. I had stood here many times before, staring into the darkness beyond. But tonight, something felt different. Because tonight, I knew the truth. I had not been captured by accident. I had been taken on purpose. A warlord had stolen me from my ship, stripped me of my life, and delivered me as a gift to Zyra's court. And she had kept me. I wasn't sure which part of that reality unsettled me more. You look at the sky like it owes you something. Zyra's voice was smooth, edged with curiosity. She stood a few feet away, watching me as she always did, studying, assessing. I spent years up there, I said. Now I don't know if I belong to it anymore. She stepped closer, the silver embroidery of her robe catching the low light. You have never belonged to anything. Isn't that what you told me? Her words should have felt like a reminder of freedom. Instead, they felt like a challenge. I turned to face her fully. Then why am I still here? A slow smile curved her lips. Because you choose to be. That wasn't the answer I had expected. And maybe it wasn't the truth. 2 days ago, I hadn't questioned how I had ended up here. I had assumed my ship was lost, that I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then Zyra's spies had returned with their report. It hadn't been chance. I had been hunted, taken, sold as some twisted tribute to the Empress of the Zelvari. And now, she was the only reason I was still alive. I exhaled, forcing my voice steady. Who was it? Zyra watched me for a moment before answering. A warlord from the outer colonies, one of many who sought my favor. A pause. Then, more carefully, she added, "He is dead." I frowned. "You killed him." "No," she said. "One of his rivals did." That should have relieved me. Instead, it left me with more questions. Did he target me at random, or had someone else given the order? "Why me?" I asked. "Why my ship?" Zyra's expression remained unreadable. That, I do not know, and I believed her. But that didn't make it easier to accept. I had been avoiding my own thoughts since learning the truth. Now, they refused to be ignored. For the first time since arriving at Zyra's palace, I spoke of my old life. Not just vague mentions of trade routes or the freedom of deep space. The real pieces of it. The long, empty stretches of quiet between planets. The smell of engine coolant and overheated circuits. The feeling of a ship beneath my hands, answering only to me. I had expected Zyra to dismiss it, to remind me that I had more power here than I ever did out there. Instead, she listened. When I finished, she regarded me with something I couldn't quite place. "You were a wanderer," she said at last. "Now you stand beside a ruler. Do you regret it?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say yes. Instead, I said nothing. She smirked. An honest answer. Then, she reached for a small control panel on the nearby table, activating a floating holographic display. "Your ship," she said. "What was it called?" A cold knot formed in my chest. "The Mariner." She entered the name into the interface without hesitation. I frowned. "What are you doing?" Zyra glanced at me, amusement flickering in her golden eyes. "Finding it." The next time she summoned me, I knew before she spoke that she had found something. The report was in her hands, the datapad's surface glowing faintly in the dim chamber light. She did not hand it to me immediately. Instead, she studied me as if measuring what I was about to become. Finally, she spoke. "Your ship is not lost." I exhaled, a tight breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But Zyra wasn't finished. "It was taken," she continued. "Not by scavengers. Not by pirates." Her golden eyes gleamed. "But by someone who wanted it." My heart pounded. "A warlord," she said, "claimed it as a trophy." The word hit like a punch to the ribs. The Mariner wasn't just stolen. It was displayed. Someone had taken it. Not to use, but to own. To prove something. I clenched my fists. "Who?" "We are still tracking him," she admitted. "But we will find him." "We." Not I. Not her spies. "We." I searched her expression, looking for the angle, the amusement, the game she always played. But there was none. She meant it. And that was when I realized she wasn't just indulging my past. She was making it part of my future. "You want it back," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." A pause. Then she smirked. "Then you will need to learn how to fly our ships." I blinked. "What?" She gestured toward the open balcony, where Zelvari warships hovered like silent sentinels. "You are mine," she said simply, "and my consort will not be weak." The word hit harder than I expected. Consort. Not prisoner. Not pet. Something else. She stepped closer, watching me carefully. "You saved my throne, little human." A slow smile. "Now, let's see if you can save yourself." I didn't argue. I just nodded, because if I was going to get my ship back, I needed to be more than I had ever been. And for the first time, I wanted to be. The first time I sat in the cockpit of a Zelvari warship, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. The console was unlike anything I had touched before. It pulsed beneath my fingertips, the controls shifting subtly as if alive. The flight systems weren't buttons and levers. They were threads of glowing energy, responding not just to movement but to something deeper. Instinct. Connection. It was nothing like piloting the Mariner. And that was exactly the point. I could feel Zyra watching me from the observation platform above. She didn't speak, didn't instruct. She was waiting. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders, trying to ignore the way my heart pounded in my chest. Then I reached out. The moment my fingers brushed the controls, the ship reacted. A surge of energy raced through the console, and the vessel trembled, as if testing me in return. The interface flickered, symbols shifting between Zelvari script and something unreadable. I gritted my teeth. "Don't fight it." Zyra's voice filtered through the comms, smooth but firm. I flexed my fingers, willing the ship to comply, but it pushed back. The control threads resisted my touch, sluggish and unresponsive. It didn't trust me. The realization sent a sharp stab of frustration through me. "Your ships don't work on simple mechanics," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "They're symbiotic." A pause. Then, amusement laced her words. "You are beginning to understand." That didn't make this any less infuriating. I had spent years flying across the galaxy, dodging pirates, maneuvering through asteroid fields, pulling off impossible landings on planets where the gravity wanted to crush me. And now I couldn't even get this ship to move. The control threads coiled tighter, resisting my grip. The ship was rejecting me like a foreign body. I swore under my breath. "You're hesitating," Zyra observed. I scowled. "It's not letting me in." The ship will not yield to uncertainty. It is an extension of the pilot, not a tool. That was the problem. I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to a ship questioning me. I exhaled, trying to steady my thoughts. Maybe I was approaching this the wrong way. Maybe this wasn't about control. Maybe it was about trust. I closed my eyes and let my fingers settle against the console, forcing myself to stop thinking like a trader, stop thinking like a man who had once owned his ship and commanded it without question. I wasn't commanding this ship. I was asking. The moment the thought formed, something shifted. The ship's resistance eased. The tension in the control threads softened, adjusting to my grip instead of fighting it. The display flickered again, but this time, the symbol stabilized. It was still wary, still testing me, but it was listening. I exhaled slowly. "All right," I murmured. "Let's try this again." I pressed forward, guiding the ship into a slow ascent. The engines hummed, low and powerful, as if considering my request. The vessel rose steadily, its movements cautious but smooth. From the observation deck, I heard Zyra chuckle. "Not bad." I arched a brow. "Not bad." Her smirk was evident even through the comms. "You are still standing in the doorway. The question is whether you will be allowed inside." I didn't need her to explain. The ship wasn't fully mine yet. It was still watching, waiting, and I would have to prove myself before it let me take it anywhere. The thought sent a thrill through me. This wasn't just piloting. It was something else entirely. I had spent my life flying ships built by humans. Ships that followed commands, that bent to logic and skill. This was different. This was something alive. And if I could master it, I might be able to get the Mariner back. I guided the warship into a slow banking turn, the vessel responding just a fraction faster than before. It was still hesitant, still feeling me out, but the resistance was fading. I grinned. I think I'm getting the hang of it. Zyra's voice was laced with amusement. Are you? The ship lurched without warning. The controls tightened beneath my hands, the engines flaring in protest. For a split second, I was weightless, the entire vessel shifting violently beneath me. I barely managed to steady it, the display flickering wildly in response. Zyra laughed. Son of a... I clenched my jaw, adjusting my grip. Did you do that? The ship did. I could hear the smirk in her voice. It doesn't believe you yet. I exhaled sharply. Great. The damn thing has opinions. Of course. I shot a glare toward the observation deck, but she only watched unbothered. You've impressed it, she admitted. But that is not enough. I sighed. So what? I have to earn its trust? A pause. Then, something in her tone shifted. Just as you had to earn mine. That made me still. I turned my gaze back to the console, to the threads of energy wrapped around my fingers. I understood now. This wasn't a test of skill. It wasn't about knowing how to fly. It was about becoming something worthy of flying it. I flexed my fingers, feeling the ship's pulse beneath my touch. I had been approaching this as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I wasn't a traitor. I wasn't a captive. I was something new. And this ship? It needed to know that. I exhaled, steadying my pulse, and whispered to it like an old friend. All right, I murmured. Let's try this again. This time, when I reached for the controls, the ship reached back. The truth had a weight to it, a sharp edge that cut deeper the longer I let it sink in. For weeks, I had believed my capture had been random, a twist of fate, an unfortunate stroke of bad luck that had tossed me into Zyra's world. Now, I knew better. I had been taken on purpose, not because I was a traitor, not because of my ship, because of her. I stood in Zyra's private chambers, staring at the holographic display between us. The warlord's name burned on the screen, an unfamiliar presence that somehow already felt personal. Zyra was watching me, her golden eyes unreadable. She had told me the truth, piece by piece, like a blade pressing against my skin. Careful, deliberate, but never gentle. He took your ship, she had said, because it was yours. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay still. Explain. Zyra exhaled, stepping toward the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Lights flickering, ships moving in synchronized patterns across the sky. From up here, the world seemed untouchable. But I knew better. Finally, she spoke. He doesn't attack planets. He doesn't build alliances. He doesn't conquer. Her voice was even, but there was something else beneath it. A quiet tension. He only takes. I frowned, my hands balling into fists. Takes what? She turned, her gaze locking onto mine. The things I hold close. The air between us thickened. I inhaled sharply. So this. I gestured toward the display. My own name tied to a warlord I had never met. Wasn't a coincidence. No. The confirmation landed like a blow. I had thought I was a prisoner of circumstance. A man caught in the wrong fight. Now I realized I had been a target. A pawn. I swallowed, my throat dry. How long have you known? Zyra studied me for a moment before answering. Not long. That's not an answer. Her lips twitched slightly. Not quite a smirk, not quite regret. It is the only one you're getting. Something sharp twisted inside me. I stepped closer. And what happens now? Do we just ignore the fact that I was dragged into a war I didn't even know existed? Zyra tilted her head slightly. You were always in it, Drake. You simply didn't see it. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. What does he want? A pause. Then, to take something else? The way she said it made my skin crawl. I looked at her carefully. What did you take from him? For the first time since I had known her, Zyra hesitated. It was brief. A flicker of something in her expression, a shadow in her golden eyes. But it was there, and that told me everything. I nodded slowly. So, this is personal. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. I turned back to the display, staring at the warlord's name as if it might give me answers. I had never met him, never crossed him, Never even heard of him before today. And yet, he had made me a piece in his game. Something cold settled in my chest. I had spent my life believing I was free. But someone had decided I belonged to her before I ever met her. The thought made my stomach twist. I exhaled sharply. You should have told me. Zyra's gaze didn't waver. Would it have changed anything? I hated how quickly the answer formed in my head. No, because even now, even with the truth cutting into me, I wasn't turning away. And she knew it. I scoffed, shaking my head. You're a damn piece of work. You know that? Zyra smirked. So, I have been told. I ran a hand down my face, trying to think. What's his next move? Her expression darkened. That is what we must determine. I crossed my arms, forcing my thoughts to align. If he took my ship just to send a message, then what's stopping him from doing something worse? Zyra exhaled slowly. Nothing. That sent a chill down my spine. For the first time since meeting her, I saw it, the crack in her control. It was small, almost invisible. But it was there. I had seen Zyra fight armies, had watched her rule over a court of enemies and allies alike. She was always 3 steps ahead, always moving the pieces before anyone else knew the game had begun. But this warlord? He had moved first. I studied her, my frustration momentarily giving way to something else. You weren't expecting this. She lifted her chin slightly. No, that unsettled me more than anything. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. So what do we do? She turned to face me fully. We prepare. The weight of the words settled between us. This wasn't just about my ship anymore. It wasn't just about what had been taken. It was about who was coming next. I clenched my fists. I want in. Zyra raised a brow. Into what? I met her gaze. Unyielding. The fight. She smirked. You already are. I shook my head. Not as an afterthought. Not as some pawn in a game I didn't choose. If I'm part of this, then I'm in it all the way. A pause. Then, to my surprise, Zyra's expression softened. Then it's time you learn how to fight like one of us. I exhaled slowly, something sharp settling in my chest. I had spent my whole life avoiding war, avoiding politics, avoiding being owned. But that was over now. Someone had come for me once. They wouldn't get the chance to do it again. The first lesson wasn't about weapons. It wasn't about tactics or battle formations. It was about control, control over my body, my mind, my emotions. Zyra's people, the Zelvari, did not fight like humans. They did not swing swords in reckless arcs, did not fire blindly into the dark. Every movement had purpose, every strike calculated. They fought like their ships flew, with precision, with instinct. And if I wanted to survive, I had to become something more than what I was. I was done being a pawn. Now, I had to become a weapon. The training ground stretched along the eastern edge of the palace, open-air terraces overlooking the endless sprawl of the capital. The city below hummed with life, its neon veins pulsing against the deep purple sky. I stood at the center of the stone arena, the warmth of the setting sun casting long shadows across the smooth surface. Around me, Zelvari warriors trained in brutal silence, their movements sharp and fluid, a language of violence spoken without words. Zyra circled me, her presence as sharp as the blade she carried. You know how to fly, she said. You know how to run. Her golden gaze flicked over me, unreadable. But do you know how to stand? I frowned. Standing seems easy enough. She struck before I finished speaking. A blur of movement, a sweep of her leg, a shift of her weight. 1 second I was upright. The next I was on my back, the breath ripped from my lungs. Zyra stood over me, expression impassive. No, she said. It isn't. Pain radiated through my spine as I groaned, pushing myself upright. I barely had time to catch my breath before she moved again. This time, I managed to dodge, stepping back on instinct. Zyra smirked. Better. Then she was gone, faster than I could track. I tensed too slow. Far too slow. She caught me off balance, a strike to my ribs sending me stumbling. I barely had time to recover before she spun, elbow colliding with my chest. I hit the ground again, the impact rattling through my bones. Zyra exhaled, as if mildly disappointed. You hesitate. I gritted my teeth. I just need a second. You don't get one. She stepped closer, offering her hand. I hesitated, then took it. The moment I did, she pulled me forward, slamming me into the ground once more. I lay there, gasping. Zyra crouched beside me, her voice calm. You expect fairness. You expect a moment to breathe. That is why you lose. I glared up at her. I thought this was training. It is, she said. And the first thing you need to understand. She pressed a boot lightly against my chest. Not enough to hurt, but enough to keep me down, is that war does not wait for you to be ready. The second lesson was about adaptation. The Zelvari did not rely on brute strength. They weren't built for it. They were faster, sharper, their movements designed for efficiency rather than raw power. If I tried to fight them like a human, I would lose. Every time. So, I stopped fighting like a human. I stopped trying to match Zyra's speed. I let her be faster. Let her come to me. When she struck, I didn't try to dodge outright. I redirected, shifted, absorbed the momentum, and turned it against her. The first time I used it against her, it almost worked. Almost. She twisted midair, landing gracefully a few feet away. A flicker of approval crossed her face before it was gone. Again, she ordered. We fought. Again. Again. And then I won. Not by overpowering her. Not by outpacing her. By waiting. By seeing. She lunged. And this time, I didn't react the way she expected. I stepped forward instead of back, catching her off balance, twisting her arm just enough to throw her momentum off. For the first time, she stumbled. She caught herself before she hit the ground, turning sharply to face me. Silence stretched between us. Then she smiled. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It was satisfaction. You are learning. I exhaled, muscles burning. Yeah, I muttered. And it only took you throwing me across the floor 30 times. Zyra tilted her head. 34. I scowled. She laughed. The third lesson was about intent. It came in the form of a knife. Zyra held it out to me, the blade dark and curved, an elegant thing built for precision. I took it carefully, feeling its weight in my palm. Do you know why the Zelvari do not carry heavy weapons? She asked. I shook my head. She stepped behind me, her presence a whisper against my back. Because we do not waste effort. We do not strike to wound. Her hands guided mine, adjusting my grip. We strike to kill. A shiver ran through me, but I didn't pull away. She stepped back, watching, waiting. I exhaled, tightening my grip. This was different. Fighting without weapons had been one thing. It had been about movement, about skill. But holding a blade? That was a choice. That was intent. I hesitated. Zyra's gaze sharpened. You still think like a traitor, she observed. You still think like a man who can walk away. I swallowed hard. Her voice softened. You cannot. I knew she was right. There was no walking away from this. From the fight. From the war coming for us. I tightened my grip around the blade. I wasn't a soldier. Not yet. But I would be ready. Zyra nodded once, satisfied. Good. She turned toward the palace, her voice drifting back to me. Tomorrow, we begin the real training. I glanced at the knife in my hand, at the fading light of the sky above, at the world that had swallowed me whole. I had spent my life running from war. But now I was walking toward it. The palace should have felt safe. Even after all this time, even after I had stood at Zyra's side and fought to carve out a place in her world, there had always been a part of me that believed this place was impenetrable. That belief had been shattered the moment a knife came for my throat. Now, I stood on the balcony of my chambers, the city stretching endlessly below, the night air thick with the scent of rain. The single word burned into the wall soon, lingered in my mind like a brand. Someone had tested me. Someone had slipped past Zyra's defenses, past her warriors, past me. And they had left that message behind like a whisper in the dark. Zyra had said little when I told her, but I saw in her eyes. She knew something, and I was done waiting for her to tell me. I found her in the war room. The chamber was carved from obsidian and lined with flowing strands of violet energy, a living system that pulsed with quiet power. The holographic table at the center of the room projected a three-dimensional star map, shifting constellations spinning slowly in the air. Zyra stood before it, her arms crossed, her golden eyes fixed on a single marked location. She didn't look up when I entered. "You're troubled," she said. I scoffed. Troubled would be an understatement. She tilted her head, finally glancing at me. "You survived." I stepped closer, jaw tight. "You knew this was coming." A flicker of amusement touched her lips. I suspected. That sent a surge of irritation through me. "And yet, you let them come after me." She exhaled slowly, as if weighing her words. "If I had warned you, would you have been ready?" My hands clenched at my sides. "You put me in danger." Zyra met my gaze, unflinching. "You were always in danger, Drake." I simply removed the illusion of safety. I opened my mouth and shut it, because she wasn't wrong. The warlord who had taken my ship was still out there. The enemies in her court, the ones who saw me as a threat, a liability, or something to be removed, were watching. The moment I had stepped onto this planet, I had painted a target on my back. Zyra had simply forced me to see it. She turned back to the map. "Do you know what the word means?" "Soon," I muttered, crossing my arms. Not exactly subtle. She tapped a section of the hologram, expanding a distant sector of space. "It is a signature, a calling card." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I stepped closer, scanning the highlighted system. "Who does it belong to?" Zyra's expression darkened. "A ghost," she murmured. That was when I knew. This wasn't just about me. The name she gave me meant nothing. Not at first, but the way she said it, the way the air in the room seemed to shift around her, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a mercenary. This was someone Zyra had history with. "Tell me," I said. Zyra remained silent for a moment. Then, slowly, she turned away from the map, her gaze sharp. "You are not ready for that knowledge." I laughed, shaking my head. "You really think that's going to work? After everything, after what just happened, you're still keeping me in the dark?" A muscle tightened in her jaw. "You assume knowing will change the outcome." "I assume knowing will let me decide the outcome." I shot back. Something flickered in her golden eyes. A warning. I didn't care. I stepped closer, closing the space between us. "This wasn't a warning," I said. "It wasn't a test. They could have killed me." Zyra's gaze didn't waver. But they didn't. The words settled between us. Slowly, I exhaled, realization creeping in. They didn't because they were never going to. Zyra studied me carefully. I shook my head. They weren't testing if I could survive. I looked her dead in the eye. They were testing if I could be used. Silence. Then finally Zyra spoke. "They want you," she admitted. "But they do not know what you are yet." My blood ran cold. "Who are they?" I demanded. Zyra's voice was quiet. "Warlord Kale." The name meant nothing to me. But the weight of it, asterisk asterisk, the way she said it, the way it clung to the air like smoke, asterisk asterisk, told me everything I needed to know. She had fought him before, and she hadn't won. The next day, I trained harder than ever. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't going to let someone else decide what I became. Kale thought he could use me. Thought I was something to be shaped, to be played with. He was wrong, because I had already chosen my side, and I was done being a pawn. A warlord like Kale didn't send assassins to kill. He sent them to send a message. For days, I replayed the fight in my mind, the masked attacker, the precise movements, the way they had tested me rather than gone for the kill. And the word they left behind burned into the palace wall like a brand. Soon, Zyra had given me his name, but nothing else. Not his history, not their history. Only that he was a man who took what he wanted, a force that did not conquer planets or systems, but people. And now he wanted me. The thought made my skin crawl, but it also made me wonder. Why? What did he think I could become? I found Zyra in the private war room, staring at the shifting star map. She had barely spoken since the attack, but I could feel her mind working, calculating, unraveling Kale's next move. I leaned against the table. "Tell me what you aren't saying." She didn't look up. "You assume I am withholding something." I scoffed. "That's not an assumption. That's experience." A flicker of amusement ghosted across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. She exhaled, finally meeting my gaze. "Kale does not want you dead. We've established that. He wants to know what you are." I frowned. I'm a pilot, a former trader, a human caught in the middle of something bigger than him. Zyra tilted her head, studying me. Are you? The question sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, the war room's comms flared to life. A sharp pulse of energy rippled through the chamber, followed by a single line of distorted audio. A voice, unfamiliar, deep. I would speak with him. Silence stretched between us. I turned to Zyra. That's him, isn't it? Her expression hardened. Yes. I inhaled sharply, forcing my pulse to steady. Let me talk to him. Zyra's eyes narrowed. You assume you have a choice. She lifted her hand, activating the transmission. The war map shifted. The stars warped, replaced by a figure standing in the center of the projection. Tall, cloaked, a shadow against the flickering light. And even though his face was obscured, I felt the weight of his gaze. Kale, you have been watching me. My voice was steady, controlled. Kale tilted his head slightly. I have been waiting. For what? To see if you were worth the effort. A cold weight settled in my chest. I glanced at Zyra. Her jaw was tight, her posture rigid, but she didn't interrupt. Kale continued. You interest me, Drake Walker. You're something unexpected. Something unclaimed. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I forced myself to hold his gaze. I don't belong to anyone. A slow chuckle rumbled through the transmission. No, not yet. I clenched my fists. You had your chance to kill me. You didn't take it. Why? Kale was silent for a moment. Then, I do not kill potential. The words sent a chill down my spine. Zyra finally spoke, her voice sharp. He is not yours to take, Kale. He turned his head slightly, as if only now acknowledging her presence. And yet you keep him close. Why is that? Zyra didn't answer. Kale shifted, the hologram flickering as he moved. You have learned to fight, Drake. To survive. But do you know why? I exhaled. Enlighten me. His golden eyes burned through the transmission. Because you were meant for more than being her pet. The words hit harder than I expected. Zyra didn't react. But I did. I stepped closer, anger tightening in my chest. If you think you can turn me against her, you're wasting your time. Kale smirked. I have all the time I need. The transmission wavered. His form began to distort. But before the signal cut, he spoke one last time. When you are ready to know the truth, you will find me. Then he was gone, and the room fell into silence. I turned to Zyra. What truth? She didn't answer. Her expression remained cold, unreadable. And that was when I realized she wasn't just keeping secrets from me. She was keeping secrets about me. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. Kale had left an opening, a seed of doubt, a whisper of something I didn't yet understand. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I feared him, or if I feared what I might find if I went looking. The universe had always been vast, expansive, unknowable, but now it felt small. I had spent my life believing I was a traitor, a wanderer, a man without ties. But the truth had been buried beneath my own ignorance, hidden by hands that had shaped my existence long before I had a say in it. I wasn't human. I wasn't who I thought I was. And Zyra had known all along. She stood across the chamber, golden eyes locked onto mine, her expression carefully blank. But I saw the tension in her stance, the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides, as if preparing for a fight, or to hold me back. You should have told me, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. Zyra inhaled slowly, like she was measuring her response. Would it have changed anything? A sharp laugh escaped me. Are you serious? You let me believe I was... My throat tightened. I shook my head. You let me believe I was just some guy who got caught in your world by accident. She tilted her head slightly. Would you have accepted the truth if I had told you before? I opened my mouth. Stopped. Because I didn't know. Would I have accepted it? Would I have even believed it? My pulse thundered in my ears. My gaze flickered toward the containment field, to the man inside, Zyra's brother. The resemblance was undeniable now that I was seeing it for what it was. The sharp bone structure, the ink-black hair, the same presence Zyra carried. The same presence that had always unnerved me when I looked at my own reflection. I turned back to her. My hands clenched at my sides. Who took me? Zyra didn't answer. That was answer enough. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Kale knows, doesn't he? Her jaw tightened. Yes. The admission sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Kale didn't want me dead. That much was clear. But he hadn't just seen potential in me. He had seen who I was. And if he wanted me, it wasn't just because I was useful. It was because I was his to reclaim. I swallowed hard. What does he want from me? Zyra hesitated. For the first time, she hesitated. Then she said, he wants you to be what you were meant to be. A slow, sick realization settled into my gut. I shook my head. No. But she nodded. Yes. I needed air. The chamber felt suffocating, the weight of Zyra's words pressing down on me like gravity itself. I turned toward the exit, my movements sharp, desperate. Drake, Zyra said behind me, her voice almost pleading. I didn't stop. I reached the door. Then I felt her hand on my wrist. Not hard, not demanding, just there, a tether, a warning. If you walk out of this room, she said, her voice quiet, you will not come back the same. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze. And whose fault is that? Her fingers tensed against my skin, just for a second. Then she let go. The door slid open, and I stepped into the dark. The corridors stretched endlessly before me, but I barely saw them. My mind was a storm, unraveling everything I thought I knew, piecing together fragments I hadn't even realized were missing. Had there been signs? Had I been blind to them all along? The way Zyra had tested me, the way her court had watched me like I was more than just a curiosity, the way Kale had spoken to me, not as an outsider, but as something unfinished. I clenched my fists. I am not theirs. I had spent my entire life fighting to be my own person, to carve a place for myself in a universe that didn't care if I existed or not. But now, it seemed my existence had always mattered. To people I had never met, to an empire I had never known, to a war I had never asked to be part of. I reached the balcony overlooking the city and gripped the railing, my breath unsteady. The skyline burned with soft violet light, the pulse of the Zelvari homeworld stretching far beyond my sight. I had never belonged here, and yet I had never belonged anywhere else. A movement in the shadows made me stiffen. I turned sharply, my instincts on edge. But it wasn't a guard. It wasn't an assassin. It was him. Kale stood at the edge of the balcony, shrouded in his dark cloak, golden eyes gleaming beneath the night sky. He had stepped into the heart of Zyra's empire like he owned it, like he feared nothing. And maybe he didn't. I didn't reach for my weapon. He didn't reach for his. We simply stared at each other. Then he spoke. Do you feel it now? My throat tightened. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. Kale smiled. Not mocking, not cruel, just knowing. You're waking up, little brother. The words sent ice through my veins. I stepped back. No. He tilted his head. Yes. My heart pounded. You're lying. Kale exhaled, amused. Am I? The worst part was that I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I turned, storming back toward the palace. Away from him. Away from the truth. But before I could leave, Kale's voice drifted after me, soft but unshakable. You can run, Drake. A pause. But sooner or later, you will come home. I didn't stop, but the words followed me long after I was gone.